think most of you already know I'm Beck, the marketing manager at Call of the Wild, and joined today by my colleague Victoria Perkins, and she'll be taking us through today's webinar, which is supporting a neurodiverse workplace. So Vicky is an experienced HR and business psychology professional with over 30 years in senior leadership roles, including chief people officer positions in global organizations. She's qualified occupational psychologist and specializes in cultural change, leadership development, team effectiveness, and effective executive facilitation. If you're not aware of us, we're Call of the Wild, and we deliver experiential leadership and team development programs in the Brecon Beacons. So today, on the admin side of things, Vicky's obviously going to be leading the session, but if you have any questions, please do use the chat function, which I'll be monitoring, and please ask questions at any point. And then at the end of the session, I'll share the feedback form, and it'd be great if you could take a few moments to fill that in. So we've got a lot of ground to cover. But if you would like any information after the session, then I'll also pop my my email address in the chat. Okay, I think that is everything. So over to you, Vicky.
Thanks, Beck. Good morning, everybody. Thank you all so much for joining. I think we've still got people waiting in lobbies and being admitted, so I'm sure that will probably continue for the next few minutes as people join. So as you were joining, hello. Yeah, as Beck says, I'm Vicky. I currently am an independent consultant. I work with lots of different organisations, and this topic has come up over and over again, as you would imagine, which is probably why I don't know how many people we've got, Beck. How many people have we got?
That's it. Sorry, about 30 of us at the moment.
Okay, smashing. Yeah, and it's a popular subject. I'm going to start off by saying I'm not an expert, particularly in this particular field. This is not my singular focus. However, as we know, it has come up a lot. I studied this in 1992 when I went to university, but as I was telling Beck the other day, interestingly, in 1992, I did a thesis on autism, and there was one book in the university library on it. So that's how the things have changed over time, and we'll see a bit of that. So you will know that this is a huge topic. It's, as I've been writing this and realizing to try and cram it into sort of 45 minutes dialogue, it's impossible to do. So I am just touching, I make an apology, but no apology for just touching the surface, really. Hopefully there's some nuggets here for us all to take away. I'd like to learn a bit from you as well, and you from each other, because we all know that that's the most important way of learning. So there are some questions and some polls and some issues in here. If you want to put any burning questions down, put them down. Beck will do her best to try to work out whether to interrupt me or not during a flow. Otherwise, we can talk about stuff at the end. I fully accept that there may well be a lot of questions at the end of this because we're only touching the surface, and that's okay. We're offering you the opportunity as well at the end to say if there's any areas you would like us to deep dive into for another session. So let's get on with it. If I can get the thing to work. Brilliant. So we're just going to quickly run through what neurodiversity is, a bit about the law, a bit about reasonable adjustments, and then a bit about that beyond compliance bit. So the bit about neuroinclusion. So definitions. Neurodiversity is, so I've used the CIPD definitions here. Neurodiversity refers to the natural variation in human brain functioning. That is all of us. The neurodiversity between all of us, irrespective of how you identify or whether you identify as neurodivergent. The diversity is between all of us. So there are 83 billion cells in our brain, and they interact in billions of different ways. And it's exactly how we all are. We're all different from each other. So it's referring to our brain functioning and the difference between us. Neurodivergent is a specific term used for those people who identify with particular conditions, and we'll look at those in a minute, and they're represented by lots of age and gender and different cultural groups. Neurodivergence is the state of being neurodivergent. So for example, we should be, and it's common, and I think I make it throughout, I think there's other parts of this where I make the mistake myself. We should be better talking about individuals' neurodivergence rather than individual neurodiversity. Neurodiversity being everybody, neurodivergence being the state of having, of being neurodivergent. And neurotypical is that term that's common, that's used to talk about someone who either doesn't consider themselves to be neurodivergent or have neurodivergence. But also we use neurotypical to talk about how we go about doing things. So workplaces tend to be set up directly for those people who are, for the majority of people, or for the most commonly occurring preferences. So workplaces tend to be neurotypical in their design. Okay, that was a spin through that. So let's firstly have a quick poll just to keep us all engaged, get our brains going. How confident do you feel supporting neurodivergent colleagues? And that poll should start coming up. I'm not sure I can see it.
It's up there.
It's up there. I actually strangely can't see it. So you might have to, for fear of pressing the wrong button and never refinding this, you may have to tell me the results back if that's okay.
I will, don't worry. So looks like the majority of people have, I'm still getting a couple of responses in, but we're definitely looking at 63% is somewhat confident, 30% not very confident, and 7% not at all confident.
Okay. Yeah, and I think that's perfectly reasonable, isn't it? Because it is an emerging and new, it's a newish topic for us. And obviously we've got I suspect we've got a variance of people across in our audience today in terms of people professionals or line managers or leaders. And it's no great surprise that we haven't got a great deal of people saying, yeah, totally confident in how, because this is new and we're learning stuff all the time. It's when doing the research for this really opened my eyes to just how much is out there. And there's a lot of conflicting information as well, as there is with all things that are emerging. And there is with the internet as a means to find information, because it does hold a lot of conflicting information. Let's see if we can cut through some of that today then. Okay, so just the basics, different types of neurodiversity. This is just an example of, because there's lots of discussion about bringing all sorts of things into neurodiversity. I'm not going to list them all off, but the point being, these are just the most commonly discussed. So autism, the spectrum condition, this is about communication and interaction with the world. Dyslexia around reading, spelling, comprehension. Dyspraxia tends to be about brain function around coordination and movement. Dyscalculia is around the numbers, performing numbers and calculations and computations. We know ADHD and ADD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and attention deficit disorder being the inattentiveness, hyperactivity, impulsiveness, and then Tourette's, which is involuntary sounds, movements, known as tics. So these are some of them. You just have to look at that group, don't you, and think, wow, that is a huge, to use the word again, spectrum of conditions, some of which can appear and can be very, very mild in individuals and have almost no impact on their day-to-day, or have limited impact on an individual's day-to-day life. And individuals may have absolutely no idea that they have one of these things. Others conditions are clearly going to be very visible, very noticeable, and, to use the word, disabling in how they go about living their day-to-day life. So the spectrum here that we are as employers and colleagues are being required to work through is incredibly difficult, and it's really, for me, really highlighted in this is what neurodiversity is, or this is neurodivergence, and I'm now thinking, well, that's huge. And you'd be right, and it's why we're struggling with this, how confident we are in how dealing with it. So why is it important to think about these things? So understanding does matter. And this is because it shows up in different ways in the workplace. So communication challenges, difficulty with ambiguity. So we're talking there about, commonly that would be around autistic colleagues who potentially aren't unable to process language in the same way, in terms of some of the way that we speak, where we do speak hugely in ambiguity. We use lots of euphemisms, we use lots of symbolism to describe things, which is potentially quite confusing for a number of people. Processing information, sensory challenges in terms of noise and our environment. Adaptation to change is a huge issue for us, particularly those of us who are dealing with organisations now. The new norm is, of course, to be changing all of the time. And we know and we see in our colleagues, don't we, some of those who are able to cope brilliantly with change, and some who simply struggle all the time when they're faced with this non-stop change. It's exhausting. Time management is another aspect, and focus, typically around people with ADHD and ADD. Okay, so when we talk about some of these things, I'm going to go back to that. These challenges we face in work, where we're not quite understanding, what about us? So I'm about to go through some numbers with you, but many of us are also likely to be somewhere in this group. So do you recognize any of those issues, communication, time management, any of those things in yourself? Any of those experienced at least occasionally? Here's the next poll. By the way, this is anonymous. I can't even see the results, let alone know who might have said them.
So we're getting some responses in now. So we'll So at the moment we've got sensory sensitivity is about 22%, hyperfocus 17%, difficulty switching tasks 20%, need for clarity 37%, and then it's changing still a little bit, and then we've got a few that say 6% that say none of these.
Well, that's interesting, isn't it? I don't know what I expected actually from that. I did expect to see lots of us identifying with this.
Someone's also suggested that maybe something to add to that is difficulty reading facial expressions. Brilliant. We didn't add into the but yeah, it's a good point.
Yeah, and I suppose there's probably a long list actually, but yeah, really good point. I do find that. What was the number for switching tasks, Beck, please?
20%.
Yeah, I mean, 22% for sensory, focus is 17, 20%. this is, and the interesting one there is 37 or at least higher for the clarity piece, because I think clarity, I do that. I spend a lot of time with employers looking at some of the work that they produce, some of their communication, and the lack of clarity is quite common. And I suppose the minority of individuals responding, saying, actually, I don't have any of these, is interesting. So most of us are going to be experiencing something in the workplace that doesn't quite work for us. And I think that's the key, is that virtually, if we are representative, which probably I would say this isn't science, but if we were representative, then, if you were to say 94% of the population will have some difficulty somewhere aligned with how we normalize work, then, we've got something to think about, haven't we? And that neurotypical ways of working simply aren't typical, as it turns out. So thank you very, very much for your engagement in that. I'd like to talk very briefly about neurodiversity as a strength. One of the stats I'm about to tell you is that when leaders were asked about their view of neurodivergence and neurodivergent individuals with neurodivergence, and 51% of leaders, this was a leadership survey, said that they considered neurodiversity as a deficit to the workplace. Now, there's some problems with some of our labeling. ADHD actually uses the word deficit, which doesn't help. But in reality, diversity, as we know, and I'm sure everybody's bought it on this call, you wouldn't be here if you weren't bought into the idea that diversity is positive and diversity of brains is generally positive. So the key to this, I think, given the fact that we're all neurodiverse, is to start thinking about what are the strengths that individuals can bring to us, rather than switching the focus from that, what has been traditionally thought of as a deficit, and start thinking about neurodiversity as a strength. So here's just some stuff I picked up. I picked this up off, it's actually a Canadian organization, and how they've done some work into what of this particular strengths about individuals that with different conditions bring into the world. So we've got lots of problem solving going on here. We've got lots of creativity, energy, big picture thinking, resourcefulness, our ADHD colleagues actually have less difficulty in switching tasks than other people. There's real power from the knowledge. If we can harness people's strengths, then we could use this positively. And I think that's where we've got to try to balance some of the deficit piece with the positive piece. So here's some facts as I say. So according to ACAS, 1 in 7 of us are neurodivergent. According to the CIPD, 1 in 5. According to us, 94% of us have something that implies some form of neurodivergence. At the moment, as at today, the accepted figures are around 15 to 20% of the population will identify personally as neurodivergent. I read a stat that by 2050, it'll be 51% of us. No explanation as to why it increases exponentially and why 51% of us aren't now. I think that's more of a diagnosis question than it is a particular, that we are or aren't either any of these things. It's clearly an evolving conversation. And here we have between 1998 and 2018, 780 percent. I don't even know how you can have a 708%, but you can, in diagnoses of neurodiverse conditions. As you all probably know, waiting lists for ADHD is 2 years. I couldn't actually find the waiting lists for the others, but you've all probably got lived experience of people who have been on waiting lists for very, very long time in the NHS. And I Googled the private diagnosis, and a diagnosis for ADHD, for example, on average will cost you around about £2,500, and might take about a month of a waiting list. But the emergence of private providers is huge. You have a large number of people to choose from if you want to be privately diagnosed. It is in demand, in other words. These stats are all mixed up and they're all over the place, but they try to give a broad picture of a very broad topic. The autism stat is one that's very concerning and interesting, and I think speaks loudly of where we're at today. So 22% of people diagnosed with autism are employed, which is a contrast to 54% of all disabled adults. So 1 in 5 autistic individuals have a job and are able to gain employment. That's caveated by the fact that it's a spectrum disorder. So as a result, some people, those people with diagnosis of autism are likely to be further on in the spectrum than others. Some people have much more milder symptoms. As I said, 51% of leaders view neurodiversity as a deficit. 51%, which seems to be a number, of neurodivergent employees have taken time off due to insufficient support or burnout. Burnout features heavily in neurodiversity because what's happening is that individuals who are reported or report themselves to have a neurodivergence will say that they are masking and having to compensate all of the time for how they feel and process and how they're working. That compensation and masking is leading to burnout. It's what causes stress and exhaustion. And sometimes, and that could be a really important thing for us to see as employers, what is causing the stress issues we have in our workplace. Some of that might be down to individuals having to constantly fight against their own natural way of working and trying to fit in with the neurotypical way of working that we employ in the workplace. And when we talk about employers, 70% say that EDI is critical. Only 33% of those reference or have a policy for neurodiversity. So it's not fully understood. It's not fully being utilised right now. How are we doing for time? Okay, we're moving on. So the law and disability. So what we're talking about is neurodiversity and disability. In some ways, I don't want to talk about this, but this is really what's a concern for many of us as employers. So firstly, not all neurodivergent individuals will meet the threshold for disability, but just a very quick, and I know many of you will be very experienced in this, so you probably don't need me to go on about it, but just quickly, the definition of disability for us under the Equality Act 2010 talks about a person who has a physical or mental impairment, which has to be substantial, long-term ability to carry out normal day-to-day activities. So substantial. So the point of this is the bar to meet the disability threshold is actually very low. Substantial just means more than minor or trivial. And most things are more than minor or trivial. Long-term is more than 12 months. And for this type of topic, that's most people, it's a lifetime, isn't it? So it's always going to be long-term. Day-to-day activities includes literally everything to do with day-to-day. It's important to say, it's not defined by work. So you can't think of day-to-day activities when you're thinking about, is this person disabled? In terms of the work, it's in terms of how they get on with their lives, shopping, cleaning, how do they do their normal life? And of course, to meet the disability threshold, you'll ignore any medication. So if somebody is on medication, particularly things like ADHD has medication, has a number of medical influences, you ignore the impact of that medication in order to decide whether somebody meets that disability threshold. Key point: the only people who can decide if somebody is disabled or not are legal people. That's an employment tribunal or a judge or the law. It is a point of law, not a point of medicine. A doctor can tell you somebody that they believe somebody meets an occupational health, that they believe somebody meets that criteria, but actually in law, the only people who will decide are the tribunal. What I would say, quite obviously, is if somebody from a medical background says that they believe somebody meets that the threshold, then it's probably wise to listen to them and wise to act on it as if that were the case. A worker does not have to be diagnosed to be considered to be disabled. A court of law, a tribunal, will not look at somebody and say, have you been diagnosed or not? And that's quite common in the workplace, where we say, okay, let's get a diagnosis and then we'll think about making a reasonable adjustment. Actually, that's not the threshold. So we need to think about that, particularly in this, because of all the nuances with neurodiversity. The other thing is, a worker doesn't have to tell you that they're disabled for you to have to do something about it. They may not even realize themselves that they have this disability, or that it is a disability. They might consider themselves to be not in any way, and quite rightly, not in any way disabled. However, if by virtue of an individual's behaviors, signs, symptoms, something that's clear and obvious to us, and you are therefore reasonably expected to know that they have some form of condition, then you do still have a duty to do something about it. It's called constructive knowledge. It's this piece where if it's obvious, then we probably should act on it. A little bit more. I mean, we know now, so in 2015, not a single employment tribunal mentioned ADHD, autism, or dyslexia. In 2025, we've got 100 cases mentioning autism, 91 ADHD, and 83 dyslexia. In the scheme of all the tribunals that happen, it's not massive, but it is still significant and clearly a trajectory. And I think we can expect to see a lot more of these cases coming out. If those of you like me who get their daily updates, their daily digest from the CIPD in terms of People Management magazine, then it's very common to see cases being referred to that relate to any of these to neurodivergence. So your approach to reasonable adjustments is going to be very, very important. That means when you decide to make that reasonable adjustment, how you decide to do it, and how it works. And of course, much broader than that, creating this culture of inclusivity, which we've talked about a lot in the last few years, in terms of generally when we talk about all of those things, whether they're covered by the law in terms of protected characteristics, or whether we just want to include everybody who's different and everybody who exists. We've talked about it a lot, and it's that neuroinclusion element of it that will be important. So, reasonable adjustments, changes to working environments or working arrangements so that an individual can do a job as well as possible. That is the definition. When are we expected to do this? When you know that somebody has a disability, or are reasonably expected to know. Again, back to this constructive knowledge. If it seems pretty obvious that that individual is experiencing a problem, or if somebody has a declared disability and they ask for help, you have to do something. If they're struggling with their job, you have to do something. Or if they've been off sick and it relates to the known disability, you do have to do something. And when I say that, it is all about writing, making sure things are documented, making sure things are discussed. And obviously a reasonable adjustment includes physical changes to the workplace, changes to the way things are done. Here's some very fairly obvious examples when it comes to neurodiversity: noise cancelling earphones, flexible working arrangements, adjustments of duties, environments, speech recognition software, being alternative, having alternative forms of communication, not just written, for example, where we do, and I know that most organisations are doing a really good job on this. Simple steps: consult with the employee and those impacted. It has to be very sensitive. There are certainly individuals who I've come across many examples of where employers have talked to me about individuals that they believe might have a neurodivergence, but that employee themselves hasn't recognised it and it's causing an issue. That is clearly a sensitive conversation to be had. But it's not one to run away from. It does need to somehow be addressed. Consult with all those impacted. This is where, as employers, we're trying desperately to please everybody, but nobody gets pleased. And this is quite common. So we do try and consult with everybody. Reach out. At the end of this, I've got a load of resources, but there are so many. I was running out of time and space to write how many resources, but there are so many professionals and experts out there. Reaching out to experts not only will empower you with knowledge and information that you may not have had previously, but will actually protect you as well, because it will show that you've demonstrated that you've tried to find expert support in a particular niche situation. One of the key points about the law is that when a tribunal or anybody else considers, or the legal side of things considers, whether your reasonable adjustment was appropriate and acceptable and all the rest of it, is because they will focus on the disadvantage being experienced. So the whole focus of the reasonable adjustment must be about, does it actually resolve, solve, or improve the disadvantage? So the first thing to understand when you consider reasonable adjustments, not just in this topic, but in all reasonable adjustment topics about disability, is, are we clear about the disadvantage being experienced? Because that will help us understand the appropriate solution to put in place, because that will be your test if ever that reasonable adjustment is questioned. Are we clear from the outset what the disadvantage is and how this particular adjustment is supporting that disadvantage? And of course, test it, trial it, review it. There has to be a review process in order for you to understand whether it's working or not. So many times, and I've probably been guilty myself over the years as a professional in the people space, where I've implemented something, given myself a massive pat on the back for doing something, for providing a reasonable adjustment and going out of my way to help, but never actually reviewing to find out whether it worked or not. I stopped there. And that's a really important point that I think tribunals now, and that we are expected to go back and say, did that work? Right. Do we have any examples of reasonable adjustments in your organisations? Because I think what I found when I was looking on the internet, and I was looking through, and I was doing my research, looking through lots and lots of different websites and lots of speaking to different professionals, I found they weren't very inventive. And I was wondering if any of you guys had any examples of where you might have produced some reasonable adjustments in your organisations that really worked.
So Anne says, I'm a trainer and I try to give as much info as possible from the beginning.
Yeah, that's a good point. We'll talk about that in a while. I'll
And
definitely.
then we've got Rihanna in my work. There are lots, oh, sorry, they're coming in now. Lots of reasonable adjustments. It starts at recruitment, and people who have job
Yeah,
interview get told the questions before the interview.
brilliant.
Um, and then I do know of companies that have quiet rooms.
Yeah,
Um, and then one of our autistic colleagues has noise cancelling headphones and takes sensory breaks.
yeah, yeah. And they're all in the chat, and so look at those. Have a look at each other's, and maybe think about them in your own workplace. Thank you for those people putting them in. Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned the recruitment piece because I'm going to go on to that. Neuroinclusion is a term that I would recommend, and I've put it in the I've put it in resources at the end. Looking at the CIPD neuroinclusion piece. So neuroinclusion is a piece that CIPD are working on at the moment, and it's just a form of inclusivity that we've all been working for. So it talks about inclusion being for everyone. So the point about this is because of the broad spectrum of it, because we know, and we've demonstrated here today, that we ourselves, everybody is struggling with the planned normal way of doing things. Neuroinclusion is a way to try to organize the workplace in a way that meets individual needs more than the standard needs. There's more than one way to do things. And they suggest these things. So inclusion for everyone, of course. Awareness and training. As we've said, we've got trainers. So awareness, neuroinclusion or neurodiversity training and awareness. The more things are discussed, the more things are open, the more transparency we have, the better chance we have of people feeling like they belong. And that is everybody, but particularly individuals who may already feel excluded by virtue of how their brain naturally works. Leadership and management sponsorship is vital. I think we've seen evidence of where this hasn't happened and it's fallen down. And we've already discussed the fact that over 50% of leaders consider neurodiversity as a deficit. We have a bit of work to do to talk to our leaders about how this is a strength to be harnessed, not a deficit to be overcome. The other thing to say about leadership and management is it's not a great surprise that neurotypical workplaces are continuing and maintained. People who get to leadership positions often, by definition, technically are quite often those who are the most neurotypical because they've thrived in a neurotypical workplace. So we've got a bit of a cycle of things happening. And obviously, if you're in leadership and you're making decisions and you are neurotypical, it's no great surprise that the perpetuation of a neurotypical workplace continues. And we have to educate our leaders into that potential that, they've been lucky enough to benefit from being in a neurotypical environment.
Mike's also mentioned, sorry to interrupt, Victoria,
yes.
Vicky, sorry. Mike's mentioned there should be more discussion in team management meetings to share practices, better look for solutions, and as trial/review is key.
Yeah, absolutely. The more discussion, the better. Thank you for that. And I obviously couldn't agree more. And this is part of the gaining buy-in from colleagues, because if you're not talking about it, and it's exactly the same as all the stuff we've talked about. We've as an HR professional of 30 years, I've had many discussions over the years. I remember in 96 talking about women in the workplace, and nothing much has changed in terms of how we've got to have that conversation about how do we help people succeed through work, whoever they are. And then there's the concept of inclusion by design, which is around, as people have already mentioned, quiet places, sensory zones. So this is the physical layout of work. So the design of the workplace, and that is, it's sort of being conscious. It's this conscious leadership, conscious inclusion. You may have come across the term conscious inclusion. Look it up if you haven't. It's fabulous. There's a lot of work on conscious inclusion at the moment, which is designing things deliberately. And this, a great place to start with team strength focus is project work. So if the next time you have a project come up and you've got to choose who you're bringing into it, I mean, you may already do this, but make sure that you're considering neurodivergence when you are thinking about who's going to be in that team, because that difference in brain processing will work really well. And once we can start demonstrating, look, this is the power of neurodivergence, then we can start moving forward with selling this to leadership and the benefits and the strengths, and stop talking deficits and start talking strengths. And that's that beyond compliance piece. We're doing just about okay. So what's currently the biggest challenge in creating neuro-inclusive teams in your organization? Do you believe, even if you're not trying to at the moment, what do you believe that biggest challenge will be?
So responses are coming in.
Excellent.
17 responses so far, so we'll just give it a moment. But by far at the minute, we're looking at 41% is knowledge. That's the biggest response so far. Yeah. So it looks like almost everyone has completed now. So time is 5%. Oh, sorry, that's jumped to 7%. Knowledge is 40%. Senior buy-in 12%. Tools and processes 12%, and fear of getting it wrong 27%.
Yeah, it's good that that's. It's not good that that's high. It's not good that that's high, but I'm not surprised that's high. And thank you for joining today, because what it demonstrates is that you want to overcome that fear. And like I say, unfortunately, today is not much time, but it's an introduction to start. I'm hoping to get your brains thinking about things. That's the key. It's really difficult with the fear piece. It's about conversation, isn't it? And knowledge and fear are exactly the same thing. You can add those two up if you like, because fear is reduced by knowledge and experience, and that's basically how to get rid of that fear. So the more knowledge we have, and like I say, you'll find there's a lot of information out there, and my goodness, there's a lot of people who are desperately wanting to help organizations get this right. And some of those people who are desperately wanting to help organizations get that right are in your organization. Some of those people are already there. You just need to ask them what works for you. And I think that's the key. So the journey, you'll have this. We won't have time. I don't have time now to talk about this too much, but the journey is if you could put it into a basic project plan, where are you today? Do some form of assessment. Where are you today in terms of what your knowledge is, what your understanding is, how you manage things, how you enable difference to exist in your workplace. And then think about that. Start with a culture of talking about neurodiversity. We've already had that as an example. Bring it into your management teams, bring it into your leadership teams, bring it into the conversation. And then the next piece is consideration. So this is about neuro inclusion by design. bring it into your management processes. How does your appraisal process fit for neurodiversity or neurodivergence and you individuals with neurodivergence? How does it fit? How does it work for them? How does it work for you? Who's it not working for? And what we may find is that just like the poll at the beginning, it's actually not working for most people. In which case, it's not neurotypical at all. And then create an environment where we can suggest workplace adjustments. And whilst I talked about the law, because I feel we have to in these conversations, it's not about the law. It's about getting us all to work best and better. Embrace that flexible working. I know that that's been the topic forever. I'm not going to go into that. Wellbeing, another topic forever. I think the basics are encourage engagement, clearly communicate about what you're trying to achieve, and get to know your teams. If I was doing a topic on creating a high-performing team, I would put this would be the same slide. It wouldn't make any difference. I just switched out the word neurodiversity. It would be about engagement. It would be about clear communication, and it would be about how well we know each other, because that creates the difference. Just as a very, very quick example, somebody mentioned recruitment practices. This has been my template for recruitment, to changing the way to recruit and assess. I say that this is a very cut down version of it, but when I've talked to many companies for many, many years about how they can improve their recruitment practices to get the best people through the door, it has included all of these things. As it happens, we're talking about neurodivergence. But it's really, I would highly encourage you to investigate some of these. First of all, so as an example of one of the management processes we go through, first of all, think about your job description. I cannot tell you how many organizations I've worked with, and I've just taken one look at their job description and been able to say, you do not need those things, you do not need that skill, you do not need that. Where's the other warmer skills? You know, what can be taught, what do you have to know, etc. Really spend the effort reflecting on how your job descriptions truly reflect what you need from that job, because what you're doing, or what happens, is people are put off, people are excluding themselves, and people are excluded for trivial and unnecessary job requirements. Offer different application methodologies. We tend, many people will go for the written application all of the time. That's clearly going to be a problem for some people. Check your language is inclusive in adverts. Use practical skill sets for jobs, practical skill tests for a job, rather than asking you questions about whether you can do something or not. Because what you're getting is the people who can articulate whatever they need to articulate best. That's all you're getting, not people who can do the job well. Somebody's already mentioned this. Give the questions in advance. There is no benefit. If everybody has the questions in advance, you are still testing to see who gives you the best answer to the question. It makes no difference to the test. All you're doing by providing questions at the time of interview is testing who can think on their feet quickest. And if that's what you need from a job, brilliant, go for it. But if you don't, then give the questions in advance. Enable people to have familiarization sessions in advance if they feel stressed. If they are somebody who feels stressed and they might need to know who they're going to be talking to, how they potentially offer some familiarizations. Train interviewers in unconscious bias, particularly for neurodiversity, things like eye contact. People, we know the traditional stat that I learned back 100 years ago in university was in studying occupational psychology is people will make up their mind within 7 seconds. I think it might be 30 seconds, but it's either way. Proceed with caution in using AI. I'm sure many of you have thought of this already. and always be transparent in how you use AI. If you are using it as a means to sift or process applications, ensure you ask about any adjustments that are required, and carefully consider how you use personality or ability tests. They are likely to bias against at least one neurodivergent category. And they're not necessarily helpful, but many of us use them as just a standard practice. It's not necessarily the right thing to do. Gosh, that was a rush through, wasn't it? And I apologise. That's because it's a huge topic. And I think we could do an hour on any single one of those pages. So please let me take your advice as to what you'd like to hear next, or if there's anything you'd like to dig into in real detail, and we can get some real detail work done. These are some extra reading or resources that you can use. It is literally the tip of a very large iceberg, but these are the ones that I used in some of my research, and but there's many, many more, and you'll find that as you start. So increase your knowledge, have a little look around. For those of you who've got plenty of time on your hands, I know you haven't, so it's fine. These slides will be sent to you. Are there any questions? Now, are there any questions or anything you'd like to bring up or say that I've blatantly missed? Because I'm bound to have blatantly missed loads of things.
A couple of, oh, sorry, Mike's got his hand up there.
Hiya, Mike.
Hello. Well, firstly, thank you very much. Really enjoyed it. Two things. I noticed somebody asked earlier, would OCD be included when you looked at all the different types of neurodiversity? And I think that my main comment is, I was pleased that, you know, in probably about your half dozen, 6 slide in, you kind of talked about the positives rather than because as you say, we've probably been discussing many of these things for years, but not labelled them like neurodiversity, or not labelled things would find solutions. But the simple fact is, coming from a statistics background, the kind of teams we make up, the problem solvers, the slightly lateral thinkers, the very detailed analytical, as against those who are very good at maybe communicating, getting that mix in the team is so vital.
Yeah.
And I was so pleased that you kind of focused on the positives rather than which perhaps traditionally we've done, label things and seen it as issues, which it's an issue, but it's a positive issue. So those were the two things.
Thanks, Mike. Absolutely spot on. Yeah. Yes, OCD is one of the many, and gosh, if you look it up, there's loads of things. But yeah, OCD one, I've seen that as listed as potentially a neurodivergence. It's tricky, and I think it's like we said, it's an emerging topic. The difficulty we have, and it's sort of it overlaps with this concept of how you talk about it as being deficits and positives, because we're still in that work in progress in society in how we view these things, aren't we? And most of us are still thinking about this as deficits. I totally agree in terms of, obviously I would, because I've said it, that we've got to move away from the deficit conversation and towards the strengths conversation. You are absolutely right that a team needs to be made up, particularly a project team. I find a team needs to be made up of difference in order to be successful, or the most successful teams. And I think we've got quite a lot of empirical knowledge about this. We've got a lot of statistical evidence now that talks about diversity in different forms, but diversity being the powerful tool for a high-performing team. I certainly do a lot of work with teams and talk about high performance in relation to strength, differing strengths.
So we also had a comment while sort of during the session that you'd sort of moved on, so I didn't want to interrupt, but Robert Lloyd Griffith was the first Autism Employment Ambassador, a world first. trying to change perceptions of those with ASD in the workplace. Most businesses buy into supporting those on the spectrum, but they need the help, support and training to do so effectively. This is a great session to begin the dialogue. Thanks. Interestingly, Admiral identified that some of their top team members and most successful were on the spectrum.
Oh, brilliant. Well done, Admiral. Yeah, my personal view on that. Yeah, so thank you very much for the comment. It's helpful, really, really helpful. I would say that in most teams, and I believe that in most teams there's levels of people who could identify with, as we've identified ourselves, we're all struggling with certain things. And I think if there was a top team, if top teams can be honest and open about what it is and demonstrate themselves, that's going to be a very, very powerful tool. It's going to show the whole organization, isn't it, that actually it's okay to be different and that we accept it. The next step for that organization and many organizations, and perhaps that's what you mean, that to your point about there needs more training, we need more understanding, we need more, what do we do about it? Then the next step has to be the implementation of different approaches to our normal way of working that supports individuals who have difference. And that's
Brianna,
that's tricky. Go on, go.
I'm sorry, I thought you'd finished your thought.
No,
I apologise.
I never finished.
Rihanna asked, I was wondering if you'd done anything on the intersection of neurodiversity and class. I have a very neurodiverse family and come from a low socioeconomic background. It's resulted in cousins getting expelled, uncles having to go into the army, etc.
Oh no, I haven't, but I'm going to now.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
That's fascinating. Part of my brain is telling me I've seen something on this. I have read something on this, but probably I've taken in too much information in the last couple of weeks and I've not been able to process it properly. It's my brain processing. I'm going to look at it.
And then Alison's also commented and said, we've seen recently that women in perimenopause and menopause find their ADHD is exacerbated, and they are no longer able to mask. I think this needs to be highlighted too. That's sort of on the same.
Yeah, I'll share with you that I've recently found myself being interested enough to get a semi-diagnosis about the way that I've called my normal, which turns out to be dyspraxic. And as a menopausal woman, perimenopausal woman, oh my goodness, have I noticed it? And it's changed my life. It's changed how I work. It's changed how I interact. It's interfered massively, and it's come up in ways I honestly don't know how I've managed to talk for an hour and remember words, because in normal dialogue I can't remember any words. It's really exacerbated my dyspraxia. I'm covered in bruises all of the time as a 52-year-old woman because I can't seem to walk in a straight line anymore. So I totally agree. It is, but it's all part and parcel of the complexity of all of this, isn't it? And therefore, how do you deal with it? I'm with you 100%, all of you.
We're sort of a minute over now, so I don't want to take too much. But Abby has asked, what intersectional trends have you come across? And so maybe this is something that we can sort of look into for another session, or I don't want to, I'm sort of conscious of taking people's time. So there's also been questions asked about next webinar. So yes, I'll absolutely circulate that, and that feeds nicely into, I'll just link now. If you could let us know in the feedback form if there's anything else you'd like to cover, because I think we found that there's not enough time to talk about this subject.
Yeah, sorry.
Quite a lot of interest. So if you wouldn't mind filling in that feedback session. Sorry, the feedback form.
Yeah, and the intersectional trends I can't answer fully and articulately. What we do know is that it's highly it's very, very common for people to have multiple neurodivergent traits, not just it's the coexistence of two together is very, very common. But that's not a good enough answer, is it really, statistically? But yeah, bring on the ideas, because I think we're all fascinated, and it's definitely somewhere we've all got to learn. And like 40% of you said knowledge, and 27% of you said fear, and you're saying the same thing, which is we need to know more about this, don't we? Because I think we're all really interested and determined to learn and fascinated by it. So, okay. I'm going to say thank you very, very much for listening to me. I don't know how you did it. I don't know how I did it, but I really appreciate your time and spending it with us today.
Thank you very much. You all. If anybody did want any more information or had any questions afterwards, I've popped my email in the chat as well. So just drop me a message, and we can connect with Vicky and yeah, let us know what you'd like to hear more about from us. But thanks so much for joining us today. Thanks so much, Vicky. That was brilliant. And enjoy your weekend. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.